Imagine standing in the middle of a brand new city. You're surrounded by gleaming skyscrapers that stretch 30 stories into the sky, their glass facades reflecting the afternoon sun. You hear the echo of your own footsteps on pristine sidewalks. Shopping malls with polished marble floors stand ready, their automatic doors functioning perfectly. Traffic lights cycle through red, yellow, green for nobody. 8-lane highways curve gracefully through the urban landscape, completely empty. Luxury apartments tower above you, thousands of them, their windows dark. Not a single light. Not one person. This isn't some post-apocalyptic movie set. This is Ordos, China, right now. And it's just one of 50 ghost cities scattered across the country. Cities built for millions that house thousands. And here's what nobody told you. Your pension fund probably helped pay for it. We're talking about $6 trillion. That's more than the entire economy of Japan. More than Germany's GDP. That money didn't just disappear into thin air. It built cities where nobody lives, airports where nobody flies, and train stations where nobody travels. And the really disturbing part? This might be the biggest economic miscalculation in human history, and it's about to affect your life in ways you haven't even considered yet. I've spent 3 months digging through Chinese municipal reports, interviewing economists who actually lived in these ghost cities, and tracking the money trail that connects Beijing to Wall Street to your retirement account. What I found isn't just about empty buildings in China. It's about a global financial system that's more fragile than anyone wants to admit. The city that shouldn't exist. Let me take you back to April 15th, 2004, a Wednesday. In Inner Mongolia, a region most people associate with grasslands and nomadic herders, construction crews break ground on something unprecedented. They're building Kangbashi, a new district of Ordos designed for 1 million residents. The plans are spectacular. A government complex that rivals Washington, D.C., a massive library, museums, theatres, parks with artificial lakes. Everything is oversized, ambitious, expensive. Here's what makes this moment so critical. The existing population of the entire Ordos municipality was barely 1.5 million people. They were building a city for nearly their entire existing population to relocate. The logic? If you build it, they will come. I want you to picture the first completed apartment building in Kangbashi. It's 2008 now. 20 floors, 200 units, modern elevators, central heating, everything a resident could want. The building sits there, empty. Weeks pass, months. One family moves in, just one. They live on the 7th floor. At night, they're the only light in the entire building. Imagine being that family, looking out your window at dozens of identical buildings, all dark, all empty, all waiting. The developer who built that complex, we'll call him Chen because he refused to be named in interviews, told me something I'll never forget. We knew nobody was coming. By 2010, everyone knew. But we kept building because stopping meant admitting failure. And in China, admitting failure to the party means losing everything. The debt machine nobody saw coming. Here's where this story gets personal for you. To understand why ghost cities exist, you need to understand how China's economy actually works, and it's nothing like what you learned in economics class. In 2008, the global financial crisis hits. The United States, Europe, economies everywhere are collapsing. China's leaders gather in Beijing, terrified. Their entire economic model depends on growth. Not just any growth. They need 7 to 8% GDP growth every single year to maintain legitimacy, to keep the Communist Party in power, to prevent social unrest. In November 2008, they announce a stimulus package. 4 trillion yuan, roughly 586 billion US dollars. But here's what they don't announce. They've essentially given local governments permission to borrow unlimited amounts of money to build anything that contributes to GDP roads, airports, stadiums, and yes, entire cities. Chinese local governments have a unique problem. They can't officially run deficits like American cities can issue municipal bonds, so they create something called local government financing vehicles, LGFVs. Think of these as shell companies that exist purely to borrow money and build things. By 2013, there were over 10,000 of these entities across China. Here's how the scheme works. Local officials seize rural land from farmers, paying them minimal compensation. They rezone that land as urban. Suddenly, land that was worth a few $1,000s per acre is worth millions. They use that revalued land as collateral to borrow money from state-owned banks. Those banks can't say no. They're controlled by the same government officials who run the local governments. The officials use that borrowed money to build infrastructure. The construction counts as GDP growth. The officials get promoted for hitting growth targets. Repeat. Zhang Weiying, an economist at Peking University, published a paper in 2014 that almost got him fired. He calculated that 43% of China's GDP growth between 2008 and 2013 came from these debt-fueled construction projects. Not productive investment, not innovation, just building stuff, whether it was needed or not. And here's where your pension comes in. Those Chinese banks didn't keep all that debt on their books. They packaged it, sliced it, sold it to international investors desperate for yield in a low interest rate world. Your retirement fund, your insurance company, your bank, they bought Chinese local government debt because it seemed safe. It was backed by the Chinese government, right? What could go wrong? Zhengdong New District, the speed of waste. I need you to understand the scale and speed of this construction madness. In June 2006, officials in Zhengzhou, the capital of Henan province, announced plans for Zhengdong New District. The plan calls for housing 4 million people. 4 million. At the time, that's more than the population of Los Angeles. By 2010, just 4 years later, the district is substantially complete. 40-story residential towers, a massive convention center, a financial district with buildings that look like they belong in Manhattan. All built in 4 years. For context, it took New York City roughly 30 years to build out its modern financial district. The construction employed hundreds of thousands of workers. Cement trucks ran 24 hours a day. Steel imports surged. All of this counted as economic activity, as GDP growth. The local officials in charge got promoted. The construction companies made fortunes. The banks extended more loans. Wang Tao lived in Zhengdong New District from 2011 to 2014. She was a reporter for a local newspaper, one of the few people actually living there. She described it to me. Walking to the grocery store felt like being in a zombie movie. I'd pass maybe 5 people in a 20-minute walk. The grocery store was enormous, probably meant to serve 10,000 people. There were 3 cashiers for maybe a dozen customers. Everything echoed. The mall had a movie theatre with 12 screens. I went there on a Saturday night, prime time, and I was one of 7 people in the entire building. They shut it down 6 months later. By 2016, the occupancy rate in Zhengdong was estimated at less than 20%. Thousands of apartments sat empty. But here's the truly insane part. Construction continued. Officials kept building because stopping meant acknowledging the failure. The incentives were completely backwards. Build and you get promoted. Stop building and you get investigated for corruption. The money trail, from Beijing to your wallet. Follow the money with me, because this gets genuinely disturbing. In 2011, a German investment firm called Union Investment buys 300 million euros worth of bonds from Chinese local governments. These bonds promise 6% annual returns, far better than the near-zero rates in Europe. The marketing materials show modern cities, growing populations, China's unstoppable rise. What they don't show, the cities are empty, the growth numbers are fabricated. The whole thing is a house of cards. In 2013, American mutual funds hold approximately $80 billion in Chinese local government debt and corporate bonds from Chinese construction companies. BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, all the names you recognize from your 401k statements, they're all invested. In 2014, Japanese pension funds have over $50 billion exposed to Chinese debt. These are the pensions of Japanese teachers, factory workers, retirees, all of it betting that China's growth story is real. But some people knew better. In March 2015, a report from the National Bureau of Statistics in China, their own government agency, quietly admits that local government debt has reached 24 trillion yuan, roughly 3.8 trillion US dollars. That's just the official number. Independent analysts estimated the real number was closer to 40 trillion yuan, over $6 trillion. Michael Pettis, a professor at Peking University's Guanghua School of Management, wrote in 2016, "This is the largest misallocation of capital in human history. We're not talking about inefficient investment. We're talking about purely wasteful spending on a scale that dwarfs anything we've seen before." He was right, and nobody listened. The global financial system kept funneling money into China because everyone assumed the Chinese government was too competent, too in control to let it fail. That assumption is now being tested. Why ghost cities exist. The incentive catastrophe. Let me explain something that finally makes this whole thing make sense. In China's political system, local officials get promoted based on one thing above all others: GDP growth in their jurisdiction. Not quality of life, not sustainability, not actual prosperity, just growth numbers. Mayor Liu runs a small city in inland China. Let's call it Yicheng. His city has a population of 800,000. Every year, Beijing expects him to deliver 8% GDP growth. If he delivers, he might get promoted to a larger city, maybe even a position in the provincial government. If he fails, he stagnates, maybe even gets demoted. Mayor Liu looks at his options. He can try to attract businesses, but that's hard and slow. He can try to improve education, build a skilled workforce, but that takes 20 years. Or he can build a new district. He can build a convention centre. He can build a high-speed rail station. All of that construction counts immediately as GDP. The fact that nobody will use these facilities doesn't matter, not for his promotion prospects. So Mayor Liu creates an LGFV. He seizes farmland, revalues it, uses it as collateral for a 3 billion yuan loan from the local branch of China Construction Bank. The bank can't refuse. The provincial party committee appoints both Mayor Liu and the bank's local president. Mayor Liu spends that 3 billion on construction. His GDP growth that year, 11%. He gets promoted. The next mayor inherits the debt and empty buildings. But that mayor faces the same incentives. He can't stop building, because then growth collapses and he gets blamed. So he borrows more, builds more, creates more ghost infrastructure. Multiply this by 300 cities across China, all doing the same thing, all over borrowing and overbuilding. That's how you get $6 trillion of wasted capital. The human cost, nobody mentions. Let me tell you about the farmers. In 2009, outside Hefei in Anhui province, the local government announces a new development zone. 8,000 acres of farmland will become an industrial park and residential district. The farmers are offered compensation, roughly 30,000 yuan per acre, about 4,400 US dollars. These families have farmed this land for generations. Many don't have other skills. The compensation is enough to survive for maybe 3 years. After that, they're expected to find work in the new city being built on their former land. But when the city is built and nobody comes, there are no jobs. Chen Guangfu was one of those farmers. He took his compensation, tried to start a small restaurant in the new district. Within 2 years, he was bankrupt. The promised residents never came. He told a Chinese investigative reporter, "They took our land, gave us paper money, and built buildings for ghosts. We can't eat buildings. We can't farm concrete." By 2016, estimates suggested that over 40 million Chinese farmers had been displaced by development projects, many of them ghost city construction. The social consequences are profound. Disconnected from their land, their communities destroyed. Many migrated to existing big cities where they live as second-class citizens without urban registration rights. The human cost extends beyond farmers. Construction workers who built these ghost cities often went unpaid. In 2014, a construction crew in Zhengdong, a ghost district of Kunming, went on strike because they hadn't been paid in 7 months. The developer had run out of money. The local government had run out of money. The workers, many of whom had travelled across China for these jobs, were stranded, broke, desperate. This is what $6 trillion of waste actually looks like on the ground. It's not an abstract economic number. It's real people whose lives were upended to serve a system that valued GDP numbers over human welfare. The coming collapse. Here's what keeps me up at night, and it should keep you up too. This debt doesn't just disappear. Someone has to pay it. And the question now is, who? In 2021, Evergrande, China's second-largest property developer, defaults on over $300 billion in debt. This is a company that was building residential towers in 50 cities. When it collapses, millions of Chinese citizens who had prepaid for apartments face losing everything. Construction stops. Half-finished buildings sit abandoned. The Chinese government steps in to prevent total collapse, but the cracks are showing. In 2022, dozens of smaller developers follow. Country Garden, another giant, teeters on the edge. The Chinese property sector, which accounts for roughly 30% of China's entire economy, is in crisis. The ghost cities are at the center of this crisis. All that borrowed money was supposed to be paid back through land sales and property taxes. But you can't collect property taxes on empty apartments. You can't sell land in cities where nobody wants to live. Local governments across China are effectively bankrupt. They can't pay for basic services. Teachers go unpaid. Hospitals can't afford supplies. The central government in Beijing faces an impossible choice: bail out the local governments, which would require printing enormous amounts of money and risk inflation, or let them fail and risk social unrest. And here's where it gets global. Remember all those international investors holding Chinese debt. When Chinese local governments can't pay, who takes the loss? Your pension fund, your insurance company, international banks. The contagion spreads. We're watching the slow-motion collapse of the largest misallocation of capital in human history, and the global financial system is more interconnected than ever. What happens in Ordos doesn't stay in Ordos. What this means for you. Let me bring this home. You might be thinking, I don't own Chinese stocks or bonds. How does this affect me? The answer is, in more ways than you realize. First, if you have a retirement account, there's a high probability you're exposed to Chinese debt indirectly. Mutual funds, pension funds, insurance companies, they don't always disclose their full exposure. When Chinese developers and local governments default, the value of those holdings collapses. Your retirement account shrinks. Second, global trade. China is the world's largest manufacturer. When their economy destabilizes, supply chains break. Prices rise. The inflation you're experiencing right now is partly because of disruptions in Chinese manufacturing. Third, global debt markets. When investors realize that Chinese debt isn't safe, they get nervous about all emerging market debt. Risk premiums rise. Borrowing costs increase globally. That affects everything from your mortgage rate to your car loan. Fourth, geopolitical instability. When governments face economic crisis, they often seek external enemies to distract their populations. A financially unstable China is a more unpredictable, potentially aggressive China. The ghost cities aren't just an interesting curiosity about wasteful spending in a foreign country. They're a symptom of a global economic system that has prioritized short-term growth over long-term sustainability, that has allowed debt to accumulate to unprecedented levels, that has rewarded reckless behavior by financial institutions and governments. The deeper truth. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. China isn't unique. The ghost cities are an extreme example, but the underlying problem exists everywhere. Governments and central banks around the world have responded to every economic problem for the past 15 years the same way. Borrow more, spend more, print more money. The debt keeps growing. In the United States, federal debt is over $31 trillion. In Japan, government debt is over 250% of GDP. In Europe, multiple countries are drowning in debt. China's ghost cities are what happens when debt-fueled growth becomes the only strategy. They built cities nobody needed because building created the appearance of growth. We're all doing versions of the same thing, just usually less visibly. The global financial system is built on confidence. Confidence that governments can repay their debts. Confidence that economic growth will continue. Confidence that the system won't collapse. China's ghost cities represent the moment when that confidence should shatter, when we should all look around and ask how much of our economic activity is real, And how much is just building empty towers in the desert? Every empty apartment in Ordos, every unused airport in rural China, every silent shopping mall in Zhengdong, they're monuments to a kind of collective delusion. The delusion that growth can be manufactured through spending. The delusion that debt doesn't eventually have to be repaid. The delusion that you can fool reality with clever accounting. Reality is catching up. The ghost cities are where $6 trillion went to die, but they're also a warning about what happens when financial systems lose touch with actual human needs and productive activity. Your next move. I know this is heavy. I know it's disturbing. But you're not powerless. Here's what you can actually do. First, check your investment portfolio. If you have a 401k or pension, find out your exposure to Chinese assets and emerging market debt. You might not be able to eliminate that exposure completely, but you should at least know it exists. Call your fund manager. Ask direct questions. If they can't give you straight answers, that's a red flag. Second, reduce your personal debt. In an unstable global economy, the people who get crushed are those with high debt loads when credit markets freeze. Pay down your credit cards, build an emergency fund, create financial resilience in your own life. Third, diversify your assets. Don't put everything in stocks or bonds. Consider real assets that hold value regardless of financial system stability. This isn't about becoming a survivalist. It's about not having all your eggs in one basket. Fourth, pay attention. The ghost city story isn't over. As this situation evolves, it will create opportunities and risks. The people who understand what's happening will be able to protect themselves and even benefit. The people who ignore it will be caught unprepared. Fifth, share this information. The mainstream financial media has been remarkably quiet about the true scale of China's ghost city problem, because acknowledging it means acknowledging the fragility of the global financial system. Your friends, your family, they deserve to know what's actually happening. Remember that family in Ordos, the single light in a building designed for 200 families? That's where we started. I want you to think about them now. They're still there, living in that eerie isolation, surrounded by empty monuments to wasted capital. They represent everyone who gets left behind when economic systems prioritize numbers over people. The ghost cities finally explained. They exist because a political system created incentives to build without regard for utility, because a financial system created ways to borrow without regard for repayment, because everyone from local officials to international bankers benefited from pretending it was sustainable. $6 trillion didn't just vanish. It was transformed into concrete and steel and glass that serves no purpose except as evidence of what happens when growth becomes the only goal. You're now part of the small group of people who actually understand what happened. That knowledge is power, but only if you act on it. The question isn't whether this affects you. It does. The question is whether you'll prepare for what comes next.